Sometimes people peak in high school, and while a lot of us find that cringy, I would have killed to be one of those people. Carefree, popular, and social. I was the opposite of all those things. I'm Hugo Griffin, and I was the least popular kid in my high school. As an adult, I found out that the one good thing I had going for me at that time also turned out to be a lie. Looking back on it all, it wasn't terrible, but it definitely still makes me feel kind of queasy. I know that high school doesn't really matter after it's all said and done, but it definitely left me lacking in a lot of departments. I was terrible socially, lacked confidence, and was super shy. I've gotten over all these things now, but it wasn't a cakewalk. Nah, I tell you, even nerds had some kind of friend circle. I didn't have any of that. Shoot, all I had was a friend line with me on one end and my only high school friend, Laura Thompson, on the other. Laura wasn't an outcast like me, and people definitely enjoyed hanging out with her. Although she wasn't one of the popular kids, she was someone people knew and wouldn't pick on. Me? I was the kid people picked on. I lived in a trailer and was the kid of a single mom. Mom was working 2 jobs just to make sure we had enough food to eat, and I was notorious for scrimping pennies whenever I could. My clothes didn't fit, and I never went on any trips in high school. The teachers were aware of my situation but apathetic. The kids were aware but mean. Laura was the only exception. I don't know if it was a sense of pity or if she saw something in me that others didn't, but she started talking to me during lunch. She was the first person who was nice to me and shared a lot of common interests. It honestly felt like I was talking to the same person as myself, LOL. Just, better off. We met after my sophomore year, and high school became a little less terrible after all that. It was a brief plateau of happiness. Speaking to Laura made me feel pretty nice, and I even started talking to other people briefly. Sure, a lot of them were hesitant at first, but I've realized that there wasn't anything inherently wrong with me. In fact, I was a pretty cool guy to talk to. I wish I could go back in time and tell this to 15-year-old Hugo, but I guess that'll never happen. My happiness fell off a cliff after I was targeted by Becca Hutchinson. Big Becca was the de facto leader of the popular girls in our high school. Even worse, she was the principal's daughter and was basically untouchable. To be honest, Becca didn't have much of a reputation for being an out-and-out bully, but we all definitely knew that she swayed opinions. Whatever Becca liked, her gaggle of friends also copied, and it made its way down the social chain. She was in my homeroom and seemed to immediately dislike me. I still remember the first time we spoke. It was almost as if people were observing us like a gladiator battle. Except, at the time, I was blissfully unaware. Apparently, I was sitting in her seat. Excuse me? This is my seat. Oh, sorry, Becca. I'll move. Don't be sorry, be better. What's that mark on the seat? Is that your sweat? Oh, I had to help my mom with moving some furniture around in the morning. It was an odd job, but the guy offered to pay. Come on, Hugo. You can't just run after every dollar like that, especially if it makes you stink like this. Yuck. After that, I began to notice that people were cold towards me again. I also noticed Becca often whispering to her group of friends whenever I was around, and it was clearly about me. Overall, it tanked any chances I had of expanding my friend circle. People also began to feed into the bullying more and more. I even remember when some anonymous jerk wrote a love letter to Becca addressed to me. She must have known that I wouldn't have done it. Hell, it was on some fancy craft paper that I would never have spent my money on anyway. But that didn't stop Becca from chewing me out in front of a crowd and threatening to get me expelled. Laura became my only friend as I became more and more of an outlier. I used to go to movies with her, the arcade, typical kid stuff. However, like I said before, Laura wasn't like me. She had more friends. And some of those friends were, let us say, social hyenas. They began to question her for her friendship with me, and I often saw how crestfallen she was when her friends rejected her anytime she tried to include me in their activities. As for me, I was making my peace with it all and focused on my academics. I went from a mediocre student to being on track for valedictorian, but an incident happened that changed things forever. I was heading back from gym class when I saw Laura walking the opposite way in a hurry. I distinctly remember how she had tears in her eyes, and I turned around and called after her, but she ignored me. Getting more and more worried, I ran after her, only to see her in a heated conversation with Becca. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was a lot worse than a regular tiff. Just before I got within earshot, Becca slapped Laura with all her might. Never ever had I seen something like that. It wasn't like a scene out of Mean Girls. It had gone beyond catty comments and passive-aggressive BS. I saw my only friend at the time getting slapped. I don't know what came over me at that time, but I ran and grabbed Becca's wrist before she could land another blow. Then, I started screaming at her. I screamed so loudly that people formed a crowd around us. Then, before I knew it, I was being dragged away by a teacher to the principal's office. I had committed the cardinal sin standing up to the untouchable Becca. My mom was called, having to leave her minimum wage job to come get lectured by the principal about how uncouth and troubled her son was. My eyes were stinging and my ears were red, and I just wanted the earth to swallow me up. After Mom and I got home that day, I opened up to her about how alienating high school was for me. Everything from the bullying to the lack of help from teachers. Truth be told, I had never told her these things before, because I didn't want her to worry. But her response was one of caring and affection. She asked me to think about leaving high school and maybe getting homeschooled. To my surprise, she wasn't even mad about the 1-week suspension I had been slapped with. That 1 week changed my life. I researched homeschooling and realized that it wouldn't really affect my chances of going to college. Besides, I would need financial aid anyway, so I was thinking about working during high school to try and make it. I spoke to Laura as well, about everything that had happened, and she confided in me about the reason for the fight with. Hugo, you don't have to do this. Homeschooling would mean that we don't get to hang out that much. Please just reconsider. I know, but it's going to be better this way. Besides, you get to hang out with your friends without having to worry about me, Laura. But I fought for you. The reason Becca slapped me was because I was telling her off for picking on you. Oh no. That's exactly what I don't want, Laura. I don't want you to fight battles for me. I think it's best if I take some space from everyone at school, even you. It was a tough conversation. I decided to let go of my only friend. At the time, I thought that it was for the best since it meant that I could focus on developing myself, while Laura could try and assimilate back into high school instead of being that girl who's friends with the weirdo. Homeschooling was miles better for me. I was working in the afternoons at a Walmart and spent the evenings learning and preparing for the SAT. The schedule worked a lot better for me, and nobody picked on me. Honestly, the time I spent at Walmart also made me feel a lot better about my social awkwardness. A lot of people from different walks of life were all working at the store, and nobody made assumptions or judgments about each other. I realized that the real world wasn't like high school, and nobody had to be a certain way to fit in. As for my friendship with Laura, I tried really hard to cut her off, but she texted me all the time and tried to set up meetings. With my work and my ambition to get into college, I didn't have time to speak to her and was a pretty bad friend. I would look back on it with regret after I joined college. However, my hard work paid off. I got a full-ride scholarship to Brown and began working in a large finance firm soon after college. The pay was insane, and my mom and I basically 180'd on our lifestyle. We moved out of the trailer park and were able to buy a small house in Austin, TX. A couple of years ago, I got a small flat to run as an Airbnb, and my mom moved out to manage it. We were in a really good financial position, and it almost seemed like a dream. I also began to make a lot of friends at my workplace and started becoming. Around the same time, Laura also reached out to me. She had followed me on my new social media account and wanted to let me know that she was in Austin too. I was excited and wanted to reach out to her to make things right between us. We met for dinner at a steakhouse and got closure on the way I had left high school. Hugo, it was really nice to meet you. I'm so happy to see the way you've turned out. Yeah, you too. Listen, I'm really sorry that I didn't put in the effort to keep in touch with you. You were really the only person who stuck up for me in school. I still remember the incident with Becca. Oh, don't worry about that. I agree, I really wished we could have stayed friends. I actually wanted to confess something to you, Hugo. I had a huge crush on you in high school. When I heard this, I nearly choked on my water. Laura had a crush on me. Even though I had opened up a little after homeschooling, college, and work, I was still a pretty shy guy. I'd never been in a relationship before that point, and I had pretty much resigned myself to being single forever. I guess the 40-year-old virgin is pretty much like my life, haha. I hadn't ever thought about it, but I impulsively asked her if she would like to give it a shot. Laura agreed, and we started dating long distance for a while. After a while, she moved to Austin too, and began to live with me in my house. It was my first ever relationship, and Laura was amazingly devoted. At some points, I did begin to question whether this was normal. I mean, she almost knew things about me before I knew them. At the time, I used to jokingly think it's almost like she's spying on me. There was only one major issue with the relationship, and that was her possessiveness. Like she hated when I would interrupt our time together for anything. For example, I often spoke to my mom every weekend, and she had begun to imply that I was a mama's boy and didn't need to check in on my mom so often. I even gaslit myself into thinking that I was overly dependent on my mom and that maybe her way was normal. After all, she came from a more traditional family dynamic, and maybe the reason I was so attached to my mom was because I had nobody else. Apart from that, small things would also make me feel odd sometimes. She insisted on knowing the password to my phone and would get emotionally distant if I mentioned hanging out with other people. Despite that, I was sunk deep into my first relationship and took the negatives with the positives. 7 months ago, we hired a bunch of new people who would be working in my department. I was going to be in charge of onboarding these people and getting them up to date on the projects we were running. When I entered the conference room, I saw someone who looked familiar. The round of introductions confirmed everything. I was face to face with Becca, my childhood bully. I won't lie, it definitely felt really awkward, but it wasn't a deal breaker. I had moved on from all that had happened in high school. Sure, I wasn't going to go grab a beer with her after work, but at the same time, I knew how to behave with her professionally. I wish I could have said the same thing for her, though. The moment she saw me, her whole demeanor changed. I approached her after the initial presentations were done and wanted to make a quick introduction and refer to our time at high school, just to let her know that I had put the past behind us. However, she looked straight through me and made a beeline for the exit. I shook my head at the interaction but put it at the back of my mind. After all, I had to interact with all the other new joiners as well. I went home and told Laura about the whole situation, hoping we could laugh about how absurd it was. The girl who made my life hell, now working under me, she reacted, weirdly. I was expecting more lighthearted banter, but Laura became sullen and went into her own world. The next day, one of my friends from the HR department called me. I knew him quite well and had told him about my personal journey, including everything that happened in high school. Basically, he was more than a workplace friend. Anyhow, I had texted him after meeting Becca at work, just to fill him in about the fact that it was, in fact, the very same Becca from high school. Anyhow, the purpose of the call was to inform me that he'd heard that Becca had suddenly quit without giving any real reason. Sure enough, my superior called me into his room and told me that we would have to restructure things as one of the members had left. On my second meeting with my new team, only one face was missing: Becca. I texted my friend back and tried to get more details from him, but all he said was that Becca had cited personal reasons for wanting to quit. Eventually, we decided that we were probably overthinking things. I mean, there was no way that one awkward interaction with someone you used to bully in high school would lead to a resignation, right? I moved on with my day, but the question of Becca's resignation still hung in the back of my head. The question was answered, at least in part, by the thing that started it all: a letter. I got home from work that day to see my neighbor flagging me down from the opposite driveway. We exchanged pleasantries, and then he explained that a tall brunette had hurriedly come by his house and asked that the letter be delivered to Hugo, and Hugo alone. He told me that this woman seemed skittish, and explicitly said that only I should receive the letter. Thankfully, he didn't ask too many questions and let me have the envelope. I was dying with curiosity and had already put 2 and 2 together. I didn't know any people matching the description of a tall brunette except Becca. I concluded that it was either a letter from a stranger or an answer to her sudden resignation. The latter turned out to be true. I read through the letter, which I've tried to replicate below: Dear Hugo, I am sure you must know by now that I am the same person who was your tormentor. I've removed the name of my high school here. I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry for the way I treated you back then and still regret it to this day. I want you to know that everything that happened, all the bullying I did, and the mean comments I made, did not come from me. I'm very worried that this letter might fall into the wrong hands and cause you more trouble. I'm attaching my email and phone number here. You can reach out to me if you want the whole truth. But be warned, you may not want to hear it. I also want you to know that Laura isn't looking out for you the way you think she is. She's the reason I had to quit. Becca. I was reeling after I went through the letter. I mean, there were so many questions that were brought up but left unanswered. If the bullying didn't come from her, who did it come from? Why wouldn't I want to know the truth? And, most importantly, how was Laura involved in Becca leaving the job? For the first time in a long time, I hid something from my girlfriend. I noted down the contact details Becca had written down and then threw away the letter. In a way, that letter scared me. It implied that the one friendship I had built in my childhood was false, and a part of me wanted to ignore the whole thing entirely. I grappled with the idea of reaching out to Becca for a month. I could tell that Laura detected something off with me, but she never asked me anything about Becca. I became lethargic and distracted, and the questions posed in that letter kept gnawing at me. The part about not trusting Laura also made me feel quite disturbed, and I began to notice more and more how much she controlled my life. I mean, my girlfriend of only a year or so knew the password to my phone, the people I hung out with, and everything I did in the day. Despite not having any previous long-term relationships to base things on, I could figure out that everything wasn't okay. A conversation with Laura about our future also set off alarm bells. "Hey babe, look at this. My cousin just had twins. Aren't they cute? They're adorable. I know, right? One day we'll have a set just like them." "Excuse me, Laura, I didn't know you wanted kids." "Obviously. In fact, I was thinking we should try for kids soon." "What? We're not even married yet. Where's this coming from?" "Then let's get married." "Come on, Hughie, you're the one for me. Am I not the one for you? Despite all our history?" From there, the conversation blew up into a full-blown argument. From what I recall, Laura took me not wanting kids to be the same thing as me not being serious about her. I was offended by the very thought because she was literally the only person I had been with. Of course, I was serious about her. Eventually, I ended up apologizing and we reached an impasse. I was firm on not wanting kids, but I said my opinion could change. Laura said she'd let me think about it as if I was a stubborn kid who wasn't doing what was right for them. Thinking back on all the lies and manipulation I went through still makes my blood boil. I guess that was the reason I reached out to Becca. I needed to know whether Laura's behavior was a temporary thing or part of some deep-rooted history that involved me. I had to be very careful about the whole thing, making sure to delete her number from my call log after I reached out to her for the first time. "Hi, this is Becca. Who's speaking?" "Becca? Hi, it's Hugo. I wanted to know whether you were still open to discussing stuff." Yeah, I can. I feel like I should, Hugo. I've been trying to get over the stuff I did back then, but seeing you at that job just made me realize that I still feel guilty about everything." "And, well, Laura? She's the reason for it all. I'm still in Austin. Meet me on Friday outside your office. We can talk at the cafe nearby." With that done, I waited for Friday with bated breath. It was obvious that whatever Becca was talking about had a profound impact on her. When we met, the two of us immediately jumped into the conversation with nervous energy. "So tell me, Becca, what happened? Why did you leave? I wanted to tell you on the day you joined that I've put all that stuff behind us." "I know you have, Hugo. It's not you. It's her." "Laura?" "Yeah. This may sound crazy, but she's the one who asked me to leave the job. She threatened me." "Ha, you can't expect me to believe that. Why would she do that?" Because she was the one who forced me to bully you. She was afraid I would let it slip to you if I worked at the same company." "Hugo. That's insane. Why would she do that? She was my only friend." "Hugo, that's exactly why. She was your only friend, and she wanted to keep it that way. I don't know how to tell you this, but she was dangerously obsessed with you. The fact that you two even spoke was a big deal to her. When you started coming out of your shell, she was worried that you would find her boring or become more attached to your new friends. I can't even begin to tell you about the scope of her obsession. It was disturbing. I don't even know what to say. Why did you help her?" "I know I shouldn't have. You know, Hugo, being the principal's daughter isn't all that it's cut out to be. My dad was super controlling, and he made sure that I never embarrassed him. Being the popular girl took some of that pressure away. But Laura targeted me because she knew that people would take after what I did. She must have been following my every move, and eventually she got evidence of me slipping up. She had pictures of me smoking behind the football field and threatened to send them to my dad. You ruined my school life over that?" "Hugo, please. I know it was wrong, but I won't justify it. But you have to know that I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought it would end after a few jibes, but she kept asking me to do more and more." "Wait, then, what was the fight about? When you slapped her?" "Whatever she told you, it's a lie." Hugo, that fight was because I wanted to stop. She was worried about whether or not you would find out. I hit her in a moment of anger. I never got to tell you my side of the story. You left so suddenly. My whole world came crashing down. Every single question or deflection I had, Becca answered. I tried to convince myself that it was an elaborate prank, but it seemed to be true. After the initial shock faded away, I realized that I needed to think about this rationally. I wanted to take revenge on Laura for her manipulation. I still don't know what I was thinking, but I left the cafe in a haze, heading home with only one goal: getting rid of my girlfriend. I went home and I called a lawyer. I quickly figured out that I could get a restraining order against her. Then, I spoke to Laura. Short and sweet, I told her that I had discovered all her lies, and I gave her an hour to leave the house. Initially, she tried to play it off as a joke. Then, when I mentioned that I had heard all of this from Becca, she backed herself into a corner. I was numb to all the reasoning, crying, and begging she did. Eventually, when she didn't leave, I called the cops on her. She tried to fight against one of the officers and was put in jail. I watched her go off kicking and screaming without a single reaction. After she had left my house, I called my mom and told her about everything I had discovered. I then apologized for being distant with her all this time, and she offered to move back in with me while I adjusted to getting my ex out of my life. I declined, though. It felt like something I needed to do on my own, so I've been living alone for a while. It's been a while since that day. I followed through with that restraining order and got Becca rehired at the company and explained the situation to HR. All thanks to my friend, it was sorted pretty easily. She's a nicer person than I thought, and sometimes we catch up and talk about our hometown. As for Laura, she's been admitted into a facility, based on what I've heard from a few of our mutual friends. A family member of hers came to pick up all her stuff and chewed me out for breaking her heart. I calmly told her the real reason for our breakup, and then she was silent. I guess a lot of people don't know the full story behind everything. The pity part is also made worse by the fact that losing me led to some sort of breakdown, which opened a whole can of worms when it came to her mental health. A few people have tried to convince me to get back in touch with her, to help with her healing. To be honest, I don't think I'm ready for that right now. Obviously, I understand that her manipulation came from a place of distress, but that's only an explanation, not an excuse. I don't want her in my life in any way, shape, or form. Sure, sometimes her friends will post thinly veiled IG stories about me, but that's something I can live with. Besides, whenever someone asks me what happened, I don't try and hide the truth. At the same time, I don't go around spreading the story like wildfire. I don't feel the need to justify myself, and I feel like this all comes from my new perspective on life. After the incident with Laura happened, I also had an epiphany about myself. I realized how I needed to work on myself to set my own boundaries and not be influenced by others. I realized that I was in a toxic relationship, and purely by chance, I'd done the best thing possible by cutting Laura out as quickly as I could. However, I still had a long way to go when it came to making myself better. That's going to be my focus for now. I'm making more friends than I ever did before, and strengthening my bonds with the people I knew. I feel more confident, and I think that's because I don't have to check myself and think, would Laura be okay with this every time I speak to someone or accept an invitation for drinks or a party. That's me, Hugo, after realizing that his best friend was nothing more than a possessive lover. Despite all that, I'm not a cynic who doesn't trust people. I've chosen to take the chance to mature and realize that I need to live life by my own rules. In a way, I needed that one letter to help me break out of the cycle. With someone else controlling my life, I would always have been plateaued. In high school, I stopped putting myself out in the world because I felt judged. As an adult, I was timid because I worried about what Laura would have thought. Now, I just do things for myself, and I think that's how we should all live life.